Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Lemon, Product Marketing Engineer with the VCF Division here at Broadcom, and I want to welcome you to part one of our three-part series where we're going to align VMware Cloud Foundations costing and pricing capabilities to the financial operations or FinOps process with some practical use case scenarios that you can leverage day to day. And so this series is really intended to equip you with both conceptual knowledge and practical skills to manage cloud financial operations using VMware Cloud Foundation. And so at the end of this series, you're going to be able to do quite a number of things. You're going to be able to understand the concept and the importance of financial operations in terms of managing IT cloud costs effectively. You're going to be able to understand and describe the three FinOps maturity phases, whether it's informing or understanding, whether it's optimizing or planning for future costs, or ultimately to that third and final phase, which is really around operating IT like a business. You're going to be able to use VMware Cloud Foundation tools to gain a comprehensive visibility into your total cost of ownership. You're going to be able to leverage cost drivers to modify TCO. You're going to be able to develop skills to analyze, visualize, and even optimize your IT spending with features such as Showback and cost analysis. You're going to be able to gain proficiency in budget management techniques to really create, realistic budgets and set thresholds and even monitor your spending proactively. You're going to be able to explore infrastructure, workload, and even migration planning strategies to forecast capacity needs and really evaluate the financial impacts of any of those changes. You're going to be able to understand how to implement pricing policies, performing chargebacks and even automate billing to really, again, increase that accountability and ultimately streamline your financial operations process. And then last but not least, just be able to apply, best practices to really transform IT from a cost center into a strategic business partner by just integrating financial discipline into your everyday operations. And so with all that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right in. And so let's be real, right? IT costs can be a black box. Servers hum, invoices arrive, and before you know it, your cloud spend is climbing faster than your budget can keep up, right? And this is where FinOps comes in. So if you haven't heard the term before, FinOps is short for financial operations, and it's all about bringing financial discipline to the way that you run IT. It's the practice of tracking, forecasting, and optimizing spending on IT resources so that every dollar works harder. And it's not just a niche key concept anymore. According to IDC, 1/4 of the market is exploring FinOps as a way to battle inflation, and 1/3 of those cloud buyers plan to adopt FinOps processes within the next year. And you may be asking yourself, why is this the case, right? Well, quite frankly, it's because when IT understands the true cost of delivering services, it stops being, again, just a cost center and ultimately becomes a strategic business partner. It's a very key concept there. And so, with that being said, every organization's path to FinOps maturity is different, but most will move through these three phases as you see here, whether it's going from gaining an understanding of their costs to planning and budgeting for future projects to ultimately, again, running IT like a business. And the good news here is that regardless of where you are in terms of FinOps maturity, in terms of where you are in this process, VMware Cloud Foundation and its FinOps capabilities can help you at every step. And so here's the first phase here. And again, that first phase is really about understanding and managing your costs. This is the informational stage, right? And so you can think of this as turning on the lights in a dark room, right? You can't really improve what you can't see. And with this particular set of features, you can now see exactly where your spend is going across projects, services, and teams so that you can understand what's consuming resources and how much they cost. And as you navigate through this phase, you're going to need visualization, analysis, and optimization tools to answer questions like, how much does my infrastructure cost to run? Why are my expenses so high? Can I even adjust them? Can I inform the LOBs, the various lines of businesses out there, how much it's costing to run their VMs? Are there any opportunities for these lines of businesses to lower their costs, and how can I make them more accountable? How can I track my budget burn down, and quite frankly, what's my ROI to date, right? And this is where VMware Cloud Foundation can help, because it has features that are tailor made to answer these questions. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at each one of these in more detail, starting with its visualization features. And so the total cost of ownership, or the TCO tool, there's a cost overview tool within VMware Cloud Foundation that helps answer that critical question, right? What is my overall cloud cost? And this feature captures all expenses associated with owning and operating cloud infrastructure throughout its life cycle. So it accounts for direct costs such as hardware, software licenses, and even guest OSs. It even accounts for indirect costs, including things like labor, facilities, and even maintenance, right? And so with this single pane of glass, right, with this view, you can get a comprehensive breakdown of your total cloud infrastructure cost across services, data centers, and all of your different environments. You're able to gain capacity insights for CPU, memory, and storage, including, what's used, what's available, and even that unusable capacity, all in an effort to really optimize your resource planning and avoid waste. And then last but not least, you're able to see the financial impact of acting on VCF's optimization recommendations. And so with that being said, let's just go ahead and look at this first feature in action. So the total cost of ownership encompasses all of your costs related to owning and operating your infrastructure throughout its life cycle. You can get a summary of your total cost of ownership on VCF's homepage. And for a more detailed breakdown, just click on View Costs. And the cost overview page provides a TCO of all the different cloud types in your setup. And you can select the cloud type, and you can view its associated cost details. You have the option to see things daily, weekly, or even monthly. And you can even see the total cost of ownership based on capacity, your cost drivers, and even your data centers that exist in your setup. You can view the details of your potential savings across multiple reclaimable or right-sizable resources and even data centers. And you can also get details on your realized savings after taking action on your potential savings. And so quite frankly, with VCF, this is a great first step to really understand your costs and even start to begin to form a game plan to minimize those costs. And after viewing your total cost of ownership, you might notice that certain expenses don't quite line up, right? Prompting you to ask the question, can I adjust these costs? And with VMware Cloud Foundation and its cost drivers feature, the answer is most definitely yes. Cost drivers let you manage the majority of your expenses from one central location, and VCF Ops gives you a head start by leveraging industry recognized standards, right? And so with cost drivers, you can apply, cost to server hardware, your maintenance contract, and your facilities such as real estate, your power, your cooling, your network, your storage, all of that, right? You're able to edit the cost directly in the UI, and you're even able to export those configured costs. So once you've got a standard in place, you can export that for use across your other infrastructures. And then one of the things that I need to mention here is that you can also include HA and buffer to even get more accurate total cost of ownership as well. So if your TCO figures aren't right, you can adjust them on the cost drivers page. Here you're going to get a list of VCF supported cost drivers, including hardware, storage, and networking costs. So let's edit the cost of our server hardware driver. I can make global edits, or I can update them individually. And so after I make the edits, VCF is going to recalculate my total overall costs. And since we're on the topic of hardware, right, VCF also enables me to determine how my overall depreciation costs will be distributed over time. All I need to do is set the depreciation time in the depreciation model. And I can even modify the cost ratio of different infrastructure types like VMC on AWS. And so here I can account for CPU, memory, and storage, and all the discounts that I received during the purchase. And what's really, really great about this is that on the cluster cost page, I also can get a detailed breakdown of total cost, current utilization, expected utilization of resources like CPU, memory, and storage. And I even have the option to change how my costs are even calculated, either by usable capacity or by actual utilization. And after you've gotten a handle on the things that you can immediately control, you may say to yourself, the VMs in that particular line of business or that department, they're very high. How can I inform that team? And quite frankly, this is where the Showback feature comes into play, right? It allows organizations to track resource consumption and understand where IT spending is allocated, basically enabling for more informed decision making, regardless of resource utilization and cost optimization that begins to happen at the end of this phase, right? And so with Showback, you can do a couple things. You can present costs at a project, an organization, or a namespace level is needed. You're able to view the cost per VM, and you're also able to see cost trends over time. And as you're using this tool, to make costs, more visible to those different departments, those different lines of businesses, so that they can understand and ultimately, take accountability or responsibility for their usage. You're becoming more of a business partner here, right? So the Showback feature can be accessed under the capacity drop-down and selecting costs. Selecting the Showback tab immediately gives you an overview of the costs that are distributed across the organizations that you support, right? And you can also select a specific organization to see its overall costs. And as this different project has prices, you can actually see the project level, and you can even see how these costs are trending here. And then for a more granular view, you can see the cost per VMs and VMs for these pods in a group. You can see things like the month-to-date cost, the most expensive resources in a group, potential savings over time, and even those cost trends over time, right? And so with this insight, you can drive transparency and accountability when having conversations with the various organizations that really, really rely on the services that your infrastructure provides. And to get you further along on this path here, right, you begin to get more forensic, right? And you can answer more forensic questions like, where are these costs coming from? And VMware Cloud Foundation can help answer those questions as well, because it allows you to compare spending across services, data centers, workloads, objects like groups, applications, and even tenants. You're able to take that insight and pinpoint any efficiencies. You're able to visualize areas with the highest costs and even generate and share reports. And so with these insights, you and your extended team can again, make those informed decisions to optimize your cloud investments and even begin to establish some budgets here. And so the cost analysis feature can be accessed under the capacity drop-down and selecting costs. So let's say we want to see how much our VMs are costing us and then compare that against its price. And so with VCF, we can do exactly that. So as I walk through the process of defining metrics and other parameters, that I want to analyze, VCF will ask me to select the objects. And since I want to compare cost against price, I'm going to select the comparison option here. And then I'm going to choose the total price metric. And after I run the analysis, VCF is going to show me my most expensive VMs in both a table and a graphic format. And I can even select the comparison tab to get similar results again in both a table and a graphic format. And this is just one use case for the cost analysis tool, right? You can also compare the total cost of ownership and potential savings of each department in your organization for things like research and development, finance. You get the idea. And then you can even save this analysis for future use by using the export feature that you can share with the rest of your extended team. Now let's talk about budget management. And as you can imagine, you have a whole new set of challenges here that VCF can help you address. And so with budget management, you have to ask yourself, can I create a realistic budget and then make sure that everyone sticks to it? How can I avoid overspending? And with VCF, you can actually avoid those end of quarter surprises because it allows you to do a couple things. You're able to establish a realistic budget based on your needs assessment and your financial forecast. You're able to set spending threshold at key points, whether it's 80, 90, or 100%, to really enable proactive management. And you're able to get alerts to track your burn down using various dashboards and alerts and things along those lines. But even after all this work, right, there's still going to be some opportunities to reduce costs through optimization, right? And so, typical optimization strategies include things such as capacity management. You've got tactics there such as, right sizing, reclaiming powered off VMs, deleting old snapshots, migrating to another cloud or infrastructure model, etc. And the list goes on and on. And as you're working with your extended team and regularly reviewing your optimization strategy and looking at how everything is progressing, you can confidently leverage VCF to answer questions like, are there any additional opportunities to reduce costs by minimizing waste? And the answer is yes. With VCF, there's a potential savings dashboard that can actually answer that question because you can quantify savings based on right sizing, reclamation, and even the migration of resources. If you ever get asked how much are we reducing our spending, you can actually show that as well because the realized savings dashboard can answer this question because you can demonstrate actual cost reductions and how they're achieved just by acting on VCF's optimization recommendations. And so with that, this actually concludes part one of the series, which is around understanding and manage, the that particular phase within the FinOps process. And we've already talked about how a lot of these key capabilities align. And so I look forward to seeing you in the second part of the series.